Castro joins me now from San Antonio. Mr. Castro, good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be with you, Chuck.
I have a feeling I know what you would think of the president's various proposals over the last few days about dealing with this current problem at the border. But before you get into the rhetoric against Trump, you're president right now. You got to triage this situation right now. What do you do temporarily? We know that there's got to be a legislative fix. I'm well aware of your plan. But what do you do right now?
Well, what I would do right now is reverse course on what this administration has done. Y'all were just having a conversation about how a lot of this rhetoric that he's put out there, in addition to his cruel policies, have actually made the situation worse, not better. So what I would do is, number one, as I say in my plan, I would go back to treating these violations, somebody that's coming across the border, as a civil penalty, not a criminal one. I would not treat people who are seeking asylum as criminals. I would allow them to make their asylum claim. That would help reduce the backlog that has happened because we've been treating this as a crime. I would also be much more active in terms of investing in our judiciary system so that those asylum claims can be processed. And instead of spending money on useless things like a wall, just billions and billions of dollars on that, I would actually spend it on things like the family monitoring program that was developed in the Obama administration, so that when somebody comes over across the border and they go through the legal process, they're allowed to be in the country, but they're actually monitored more carefully in a community-based way. And this program actually had a 99% success rate of people checking back in and making their court appearances. So I would do this in a smarter way. In the long term, as I put in my People First plan, I would have us strike up a stronger partnership with these Northern Triangle countries like Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, so that people can find safety and opportunity there instead of having to come to the United States and seek opportunity here.
All right, I want to peel back a couple of these things. First, I want to talk about your decision that you'd like to make it a civil penalty, not a criminal penalty. Opponents of that idea are going to say you are essentially opening the door to open borders. People will come in, you'll never see them again because there's really no penalty. And what does that do to the power of deportation, for instance?
Yeah, this whole talk about open borders is the only thing that is a Republican talking point. You know, we still have 654 miles of fencing. We have thousands of personnel.
Would you keep all that fencing?
Our border. What was the question?
Would you keep all that fencing, by the way, that's still there? Would you keep it all?
I don't know that I would keep every single inch of that fencing. To the extent, for instance, that some of that fencing goes over environmentally sensitive areas, I would be open to reviewing that. Most of that fencing is there. It's going to stay there. But let me finish answering the question. So, you know, this is not open borders. That's simply a talking point. What it would do is treat people with compassion and respect. They would still be in a judicial process. I would also say, Chuck, as a lot of your viewers know, this is how we treated these types of violations all the way up until about 2004. They were treated as from the late 1920s until 2004, when we had something called Section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act in place, where this could be treated as a crime, but it wasn't. It was treated as a civil violation. And I believe that that's the better route to go. That would not mean open borders. It would just mean that we would be able to reduce the backlog and treat people humanely, and ensure, as I said, through something like the family monitoring program, that they actually show up back in court. And so there's a smarter way to do this that would not create the chaos that this president has. I mean, it has been a total failure. Is there anybody out there that can look at what's happening on the border today and say that Trump has actually been a success? No, he's actually made it worse.
Program. I remember that during the 2008 Republican primaries. Mike Huckabee was a big advocate of that, saying, hey, there are better ways. If FedEx can track packages, we can track people in the country. There are ways to do this for what it's worth. I don't know if he still shares that view now, but back then he did. By the way, how would that work? A GPS device? Is that what you're thinking? Something like that?
Well, they're actually in this program, this particular one, they did not do that. They had essentially people who would check in with them. They would also have to go and meet with essentially a caseworker that continues to monitor where they're at, keep in touch with the family, make sure that they show up to their court appointment. And it turned out to be very successful, had a 99% success rate. And so this is something that we can build on and scale up instead of wasting billions of dollars on a wall that is not going to work. On top of that, and I hope this part doesn't get lost in the shuffle, we need to take a long-term view. We need the equivalent of a 21st century Marshall Plan for Central America so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of having to make the dangerous journey and knock on the door of the United States.
I'm curious if you couldn't get your plan through, but Republicans said, you know what, we'll take the 2013 compromise plan that the so-called Gang of Eight bill that the Senate passed, but the House never took up. Could you live with that piece of legislation?
Well, I think what I propose is a better plan, and I'm always willing to listen. And of course, in any legislative process, there's going to be negotiation. But I believe that that the plan that I've set forth is a better plan. I think it spends money more wisely, that it treats people with compassion and not with cruelty, and that in the long run, it's going to mean not only that this challenge is going to be addressed in a better way and more humanely, but in the long run, we're not going to have as many people that are knocking on the door of the United States.
The president wants to threaten these so-called sanctuary cities, and I say so-called because there really isn't a definition to all of this that is fully out there. But is there actually a need to find a way to keep? I mean, if we were living in a rational moment here on this, we would, for instance, when I grew up in Miami, and there were times that the federal government asked other cities and states who can help out on refugees, who can help out on placing folks, because at the time Miami was getting overloaded at the time, and you saw other cities and states step up. I mean, there is some precedent to doing this when everybody's singing from the same song sheet.
Well, no doubt. In fact, the way that it used to be done, as you said, and even most recently in the Obama administration, is that that the federal government would work with local communities, including with local nonprofits, whether it's Catholic Charities or a number of other nonprofits that help support migrants who are released here in the United States, to see what the capacity was for them to take on the number of people that were going to be released. But what they wouldn't do is what the president is suggesting, is essentially to use these migrants as political pawns to go and, in the view of the president, apparently punish his political opponents by, quote unquote, dumping migrants or flooding them into those communities without the support services they need, without the community being aware that this is happening. That makes no sense. And it's another example of how cruel and how irrational this president is when it comes to this issue. What's become clearer and clearer is that he believes that this issue, and this issue more than any other issue out there, is the way that he thinks he's going to get reelected, with a very narrow electoral college victory in certain states. And what I've said is that we can't be afraid of that as Democrats. I put my plan out there with a completely different vision from this president, because I'm not afraid of that, and I'm going to make the argument for the opposite case than he's made.
What would you advise if your brother came to you, he's serving in Congress, and says Mitch McConnell wants to try to have some bipartisan talks between the Democratic House, Republican Senate, see if they can get something together? It sounds like McConnell almost wants to ignore the White House for a while. Would you advise House Democrats, including your brother, you know what, sit down with McConnell, not a bad idea right now?
Well, I would always advise people to listen, see what's possible. You can't get anywhere if you don't at least sit down and talk. I don't see anything wrong with that. However, it all depends on the details, right? Like any other piece of legislation. So, I think it's worth talking. I wish the president were more amenable to actually reaching out to the other side of the aisle to get things done. I have my doubts about Mitch McConnell, too, honestly. But on this issue, I do think that it is worth talking, sure.
All right, let me talk a little bit about the campaign. Is there a point where there's so many candidates it's hard to stand out?
What are we up to now? About 19 or 20 candidates?
And that doesn't count Biden, right? He hasn't announced yet. So, we're getting close to 2 dozen.
There's no doubt that it's crowded, but, I'm going to let other people deal with their campaigns. For me, I've been out there, I've been delivering a compelling, strong vision for the future of the country, talking about how we can become the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation in the 21st century. Pointing out that I'm one of the few candidates that has executive experience and a track record of getting things done, as somebody who has served as a cabinet member and as the mayor of the 7th largest city, and also that I represent a new generation of leadership. And so that's what all the candidates are going to do, and I'm going to do, is go out there and work hard, and do all of the things that you need to do, knock on doors in Iowa and get out to these town halls. And I'm looking forward to the debates, because I do think that people will get a chance to compare candidates next to each other. And I'm confident, at least for myself, that once that starts, I'm going to make some traction.
Very quickly on health care. There's a lot of discussion about single payer versus Obamacare and expanding that. Which category are you in? Would you like to see the whole system scratched and you start over, go with the single payer system, something similar to what Bernie Sanders approached to? Or do you go with what some of the other candidates are talking about, which is take Obamacare, make it work, and add a public option?
I grew up with a grandmother that had diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And so throughout my life when I was growing up, I saw the impact that diabetes had on her and the procedures that she had to go through. She had to have one of her feet amputated right before she passed away in 1996. But thankfully, she had Medicare that whole time. I want to strengthen Medicare for the people who have it, and then make sure that Medicare is there for everybody who wants it. At the same time, I'm not against somebody having their own private health insurance plan if they want to do that. But we absolutely need to make sure that people can be on Medicare, and a strong Medicare system if they want to do that.
So you'd like to see a voluntary Medicare for all, it sounds like, of some form.
Yeah,
okay.
For people to have the opportunity to be enrolled in Medicare, but if they have a private health insurance plan that they want to stick to, then I believe that that's okay too. What I don't believe is that the profit motive should ever determine whether a human being in this country gets health care and medication that they need. I disagree with that. We need a system where everybody can get care, not just insurance, but actual care in this country.
All right. Julian Castro, much appreciate you coming on. I know we spent a lot of time on one issue. I wanted to get in a couple others in there. I look forward to having you on again.
Great to be on.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.